What happens when the future king and queen of England decide to roll up their sleeves and serve dinner to their guests? What started as an ordinary evening celebration at their newly renovated countryside home turned into an unforgettable moment that would redefine how the world sees the British royal family. Picture this: distinguished guests arriving at a beautiful estate, expecting royal treatment and formal service, only to discover their hosts personally greeting them at the door, taking their coats, and later emerging from the kitchen with plates in hand. This isn't a scene from a movie or a publicity stunt. This is the true story of how Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, created magic through the simple act of genuine hospitality. In a world where royal protocol usually keeps the monarchy at arm's length from the people, what drove this royal couple to break tradition so completely? The answer lies in their desire to connect authentically with their community and show that true nobility comes not from being served, but from serving others. This is the remarkable true story of an evening that started with nervous excitement and ended with tears of joy, laughter that echoed through ancient halls, and bonds formed that would last a lifetime. It's a story about breaking down walls, creating unexpected friendships, and discovering that the most precious gift you can give someone is your genuine attention and care. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Adelaide Cottage as Catherine stood in the newly renovated kitchen, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. The cottage had been their sanctuary for months now, a place where she and William could simply be themselves away from the constant scrutiny of royal life. Today marked exactly 6 months since they had moved in, and tonight would be their first real celebration in their new home. The idea had come to her 3 weeks ago while she was volunteering at a local community center. She had watched an elderly volunteer named Margaret serve soup to homeless visitors with such grace and warmth that it made Catherine reflect on what true service really meant. That evening, as she shared the experience with William over dinner, they both realized they wanted their housewarming celebration to be different from typical royal gatherings. William had been initially hesitant. "You know what the protection officers will say," he had reminded her, running his fingers through his hair the way he always did when he was thinking deeply. "And the household staff will think we've lost our minds." But Catherine had already made up her mind. "We spend so much time being served by others. What if, just once, we turned that around? What if we actually took care of our guests instead of having others do it for us?" The guest list had been carefully crafted over several discussions. They wanted people who had made a real difference in their lives or in their community, not just the usual roster of dignitaries and officials. There was Sarah Thompson, the headmistress of the local primary school who had shown such kindness to their children. James and Emma Mitchell, the couple who ran the village bakery and always had a warm smile ready. Dr. Patricia Williams, who had delivered countless babies in the area and never asked for recognition. Michael O'Connor, the groundskeeper at the nearby historic church who had become a friend through many quiet conversations about gardening and life. Each person had received a handwritten invitation from Catherine herself, written on simple cream-colored cardstock rather than official royal stationery. The invitations read, "William and I would be honored to welcome you to our home for an evening of friendship and gratitude. Please join us for dinner as our way of saying thank you for all the ways you enrich our community." The responses had been immediate and enthusiastic, though several guests had called to ask if they should bring anything or if there was a particular dress code. Catherine had personally called each one back to assure them that the evening was meant to be relaxed and comfortable. Planning the menu had been one of Catherine's favorite parts of the preparation. She had spent hours in the kitchen experimenting with recipes, determined to cook everything herself rather than rely on the royal chefs. William had found her one evening surrounded by cookbooks, making notes and testing different combinations of flavors. "You know," he had said, settling into a chair beside her, "the staff is going to want to help. It's what they're trained to do." Catherine had looked up from her notes, her eyes bright with determination. "I know they mean well, and I appreciate everything they do for us. But tonight isn't about perfection or protocol. It's about connection. I want our guests to taste food that I prepared with my own hands, to know that every dish was made with care specifically for them." They had compromised by asking their security team to be as unobtrusive as possible and requesting that the household staff enjoy an evening off. Only Maria, their trusted housekeeper, would remain on the property, but she had been asked to stay in the staff quarters unless there was an emergency. The cottage itself had been transformed over the past few days. William and Catherine had spent hours moving furniture, arranging flowers from their own garden, and setting up the dining room to feel intimate rather than formal. They had chosen to use Catherine's grandmother's china, pieces that had been carefully preserved and rarely used. Each place setting included a small card with a personal note explaining why that particular guest was important to them. The living room had been arranged with comfortable seating areas that encouraged conversation. Catherine had replaced the formal artwork with family photos and paintings done by local artists. Soft lighting from table lamps created a warm atmosphere that felt more like a family gathering than a royal function. William had taken charge of selecting the wines and had surprised Catherine by choosing bottles from small, family-owned vineyards rather than expensive vintage collections. "If we're going to be authentic," he had explained, "everything should reflect real people and real stories." The morning of the dinner, Catherine woke early to begin preparations. She had planned a menu that included roasted chicken with herbs from their garden, seasonal vegetables sourced from local farms, homemade bread, and a chocolate tart that had been her grandmother's recipe. Each dish required careful timing and attention, but she was determined to manage it all herself. William found her in the kitchen at 7 in the morning, already busy chopping vegetables and preparing marinades. "Good morning, chef," he said with a smile, kissing her cheek. "What can your sous chef do to help?" They worked together in comfortable silence, moving around each other with the practiced ease of a couple who had learned to share space and tasks. William proved surprisingly skilled at bread making, kneading the dough with careful attention while Catherine focused on seasoning the chicken and preparing the vegetable dishes. As the morning progressed, delicious aromas began to fill the cottage. The smell of fresh herbs, roasting vegetables, and baking bread created an atmosphere that felt like home in the deepest sense of the word. Catherine realized that this was exactly what she had hoped for, a space that felt warm and welcoming rather than grand and intimidating. Around midday, William suggested they take a break and walk through the garden together. The autumn air was crisp and clear, and the trees around their property displayed brilliant colors that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. As they walked hand in hand along the garden paths, Catherine felt a sense of peace and anticipation that she rarely experienced before royal events. "Are you nervous?" William asked, sensing her thoughtful mood. Catherine considered the question carefully. "Not nervous exactly, more like excited and hopeful. I keep thinking about how our guests will feel when they realize what we're planning to do. I hope they understand that it comes from a place of genuine appreciation." William stopped walking and turned to face her. "They will understand because they know us. That's why we chose them. These are people who see us as neighbors and friends, not just as titles or positions." The afternoon was spent on final preparations. Catherine arranged fresh flowers in simple glass vases, choosing blooms that reflected the season rather than exotic hothouse flowers. William set up a playlist of music that included everything from classical pieces to contemporary songs, creating a soundtrack that would encourage relaxation and conversation. As evening approached, Catherine changed into a simple but elegant dress in deep blue, one she had chosen because it felt approachable rather than regal. William wore dark trousers and a casual sweater, looking more like a country gentleman than a future king. They both agreed that their appearance should signal to their guests that this was an evening for genuine connection rather than formal ceremony. The final touch was lighting candles throughout the main floor of the cottage. The warm, flickering light created an atmosphere of intimacy and comfort that no amount of expensive lighting could have achieved. As Catherine placed the last candle on the dining room table, she felt a deep satisfaction knowing that every element of the evening had been chosen and prepared with love and intention. Standing together in their transformed home, watching the sun set through the windows, and feeling the anticipation of the evening ahead, William and Catherine shared a moment of quiet confidence. They had created something special, something that reflected their values and their hopes for how they wanted to connect with the people in their lives. Whatever happened that evening, they knew it would be authentic and meaningful. The first guests would arrive in less than an hour, and the real magic of the evening was about to begin. The sound of gravel crunching under car tires announced the arrival of the first guests at exactly 7 o'clock. Catherine felt her heart skip a beat as she watched through the window, while Dr. Patricia Williams stepped out of her modest sedan, looking around with obvious curiosity at the intimate setting. The doctor had clearly taken special care with her appearance, wearing a beautiful navy dress and carrying a small bouquet of flowers from her own garden. William straightened his sweater and walked toward the front door, but Catherine caught his arm gently. "Remember," she whispered with a smile, were the hosts tonight in every sense of the word. They opened the door together, greeting Dr. Williams with warm smiles and immediate hugs rather than formal handshakes. The doctor's surprise was evident as Catherine took her coat personally, and William accepted the flowers with genuine appreciation. "Your Majesty, you really didn't need to." Dr. Williams began, but Catherine interrupted her gently. "Tonight, we're just William and Catherine, and you're our honored guest. We're so happy you could come." The doctor's formal posture relaxed almost immediately as she was led into the warmly lit living room. The transformation in her demeanor was exactly what Catherine had hoped for. Instead of the slightly nervous reverence that usually characterized interactions with royal family members, Dr. Williams began to look around with genuine curiosity and growing comfort. "This is absolutely lovely," she said, admiring the personal touches and comfortable arrangement of the room. "It feels like a real home." "That's exactly what we hoped you'd say," William replied, offering her a glass of wine from one of the small vineyards he had chosen. As he explained the story behind the wine and the family who produced it, Dr. Williams relaxed even further, asking questions about the vineyard and sharing stories about her own attempts at gardening. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of James and Emma Mitchell, the bakery owners who had become such an important part of the village community. Emma was carrying a beautifully decorated cake despite Catherine's instructions that guests shouldn't bring anything. "We couldn't come empty-handed," Emma explained apologetically as Catherine took the cake with obvious delight. "It's nothing fancy, just our grandmother's apple cake recipe." "It's perfect," Catherine assured her, meaning every word. "We'll have it with coffee later." "You both look wonderful." James was clearly overwhelmed by the personal attention. As a man who rose at 4 every morning to begin baking fresh bread for the village, he rarely had opportunities to socialize or be celebrated. When William asked him about his work and listened with genuine interest to his stories about different types of bread and the satisfaction of feeding his community, James's face lit up with pride and pleasure. Sarah Thompson, the headmistress, arrived next, bringing with her the kind of warm energy that made her so effective with children. She had chosen to wear an elegant burgundy dress that brought out her silver hair beautifully. Catherine and William greeted her at the door with the same personal warmth they had shown the other guests. "I have to admit," Sarah said with a laugh as Catherine took her wrap, "I've been wondering all week what this evening would be like. Your invitation was so different from anything I expected." "Different how?" William asked with interest as he guided her toward the others. "More personal, more human. It felt like being invited to dinner by friends rather than summoned to a royal function." Catherine exchanged a meaningful look with William. This was exactly the response they had hoped to create. The conversation in the living room was already flowing naturally, with Dr. Williams and the Mitchells discovering shared interests, and Sarah adding her own stories about life in the village. Michael O'Connor was the last to arrive, and his appearance brought a special warmth to Catherine's heart. The groundskeeper had clearly made an enormous effort with his appearance, wearing what was obviously his best suit, and carrying himself with a dignity that came from a lifetime of honest work. His hands, usually rough from outdoor labor, had been carefully cleaned, though they still showed the permanent stains that came from decades of working with soil and plants. "Michael," Catherine said, taking his hands in both of hers, "you look absolutely distinguished. Thank you so much for coming." The older man's eyes filled with moisture at the genuine warmth in her voice. "It's my honor, ma'am. This old cottage has never looked so beautiful." "That's because it's finally filled with the right people," William said, joining them and clapping Michael on the shoulder. "Come meet everyone. I think you and James will find you have a lot in common." As William had predicted, Michael and James immediately connected over their shared appreciation for traditional craftsmanship and early morning schedules. The groundskeeper's stories about maintaining the historic church gardens fascinated the baker, who revealed his own passion for growing herbs that he used in his baking. With all the guests present, the living room filled with the kind of animated conversation that happens when people who share common values and genuine respect for each other come together. Catherine moved between the groups, ensuring everyone had what they needed while observing with satisfaction how naturally the connections were forming. Dr. Williams and Sarah discovered they had both been advocating for better mental health resources in the village schools. Emma and Michael found common ground in their love of local history and their concern about preserving traditional ways of life in an increasingly modern world. The conversations were the kind that happened between neighbors and friends rather than the careful, formal exchanges typical of royal gatherings. After allowing time for these natural connections to develop, Catherine caught William's eye and nodded toward the kitchen. It was time for the surprise that would define the evening. "If you'll excuse us for just a moment," William announced to the group. "Catherine and I need to check on something in the kitchen." The guests continued their conversations, assuming their hosts were simply coordinating with staff or making final preparations for dinner. None of them suspected that William and Catherine were about to emerge from the kitchen carrying the first course themselves. In the kitchen, Catherine felt a flutter of nervous excitement as she and William began plating the appetizers she had spent the morning preparing. The smoked salmon canapes with cream cheese and fresh dill looked elegant on the simple white plates, and the seasonal vegetable tart cut into perfect triangles showed the care she had taken with every detail. "Ready?" William asked, lifting a tray of the appetizers while Catherine picked up small plates and napkins. "More than ready," she replied, feeling a surge of anticipation for the moment when their guests would realize what was happening. They walked back into the living room carrying the trays, and the conversation gradually stopped as their guests noticed what they were seeing. Dr. Williams was the first to speak, her voice filled with astonishment. Are you serving us yourselves?" Catherine's smile was radiant as she offered the first plate to Dr. Williams. "We certainly are. We wanted tonight to be about showing our appreciation for all of you, and what better way than to take care of you personally?" The room fell silent for a moment as the full impact of the gesture sank in. These were people who had spent their entire lives serving others in various ways, and suddenly, they were being served by members of the royal family. The emotional weight of the moment was palpable. Emma Mitchell was the first to react, her eyes filling with tears. "You don't need to do this for us," she whispered. "But we want to," William said gently, offering James a plate with obvious pleasure. "You spend your days taking care of others. Tonight, let us take care of you." Michael O'Connor looked at the beautifully prepared food being offered to him by the future King of England and shook his head in wonder. "In all my years, I never imagined anything like this." As Catherine and William moved around the room, personally serving each guest and ensuring everyone had what they needed, the atmosphere transformed completely. The surprise and initial shock gave way to something deeper, a recognition of the genuine respect and affection being demonstrated through this simple act of service. Sarah Thompson accepted her plate with a smile that reached her eyes. "You know," she said to the room, "this is exactly the kind of lesson I try to teach my students about the importance of serving others. And now you have a story that will inspire them for years, Dr. Williams added, taking a bite of the salmon canapé and closing her eyes with appreciation. "This is absolutely delicious. You made this yourself?" Catherine nodded, her cheeks flushed with pleasure at the compliment. "I wanted everything tonight to be personal. Every dish was prepared with you in mind." The conversation that followed was unlike anything any of them had experienced. The guests were no longer thinking about protocol or proper behavior. Instead, they were simply people enjoying exceptional food prepared with love and being cared for by hosts who genuinely valued their presence. As they finished the appetizers, William collected the plates himself, while Catherine explained what would come next. The evening had begun exactly as they had hoped, with surprise giving way to warmth and genuine connection. But the real magic was still to come. As William and Catherine disappeared into the kitchen again to prepare the main course, the guests found themselves in a state of amazed disbelief. The conversation that had been flowing naturally before took on an entirely different quality now that everyone understood the extraordinary nature of what was happening. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and discover this was all a dream," James Mitchell said, shaking his head with a smile. "The future King of England just served me appetizers that his wife made herself. And did you see how carefully she plated everything?" Emma added. "Every garnish was placed with such attention. You can tell she put real thought and care into every detail." Dr. Williams, who had attended numerous formal medical conferences and charity events with royal patronage, was perhaps the most astounded by the contrast. "I've been to royal functions before," she said thoughtfully, "but they've always felt like performances somehow. Everyone playing their assigned roles. This feels completely different. This feels real." Michael O'Connor, who had been quietly observing everything with the careful attention of someone who spent his days tending to details, spoke up with characteristic insight. "It reminds me of something my grandmother used to say," he said softly. "She always told me that you can tell a person's true character not by how they treat people who can do something for them, but by how they treat people who can do nothing for them in return." Sarah Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "But that's just it. They're not treating us like we can do nothing for them. They're treating us like what we do matters deeply to them. In the kitchen, William and Catherine were working with the focused efficiency of a team that had practiced their choreography. The roasted chicken, golden brown and fragrant with herbs from their own garden, was resting while Catherine prepared the accompanying roasted vegetables, and William carved the meat with careful attention to presentation. "Listen to that," Catherine said softly, pausing in her preparation of the sauce to hear the animated conversation flowing from the living room. The sound of genuine laughter and engaged voices filled the cottage, creating exactly the atmosphere they had hoped to achieve. It was the sound of people who had forgotten to be intimidated and were simply enjoying each other's company. "They're not thinking about who we are anymore," William observed with satisfaction as he arranged the sliced chicken on serving platters. "They're just being themselves." Catherine smiled as she tasted the pan sauce, adjusting the seasoning one final time. That was always the goal, to create space where everyone could simply be human together. The preparation of the main course required more coordination than the appetizers, so they had decided to plate everything in the kitchen and serve it family style rather than individually. Catherine had prepared 3 different vegetable dishes: roasted root vegetables with rosemary, green beans with almonds, and a gratin of potatoes that had been her grandmother's specialty. As they loaded the serving platters and gathered the necessary utensils, both William and Catherine felt a deep sense of anticipation. The appetizers had been well received, but the main course represented the heart of the meal and the culmination of Catherine's careful planning and preparation. "Ready for round 2? William asked, lifting 2 of the serving platters while Catherine gathered the vegetables and homemade bread. "I've never been more ready for anything," Catherine replied, her eyes sparkling with excitement. They emerged from the kitchen like a perfectly coordinated service team, carrying the aromatic platters that immediately captured everyone's attention. The guests watched in continued amazement as William and Catherine began setting the dishes on the dining table, explaining each one and inviting everyone to move to their seats. "The chicken is seasoned with herbs from our garden," Catherine explained as she placed the golden bird in the center of the table. "The rosemary and thyme have been growing just outside our kitchen window all summer. And these vegetables," William added, setting down the colorful array of roasted roots, "came from the farm stand down the road. We wanted everything to reflect our local community." The dining room, lit by candles and the soft glow of table lamps, created an atmosphere of intimate celebration. Catherine had arranged the seating to encourage conversation, avoiding any sense of hierarchy or formality. She and William sat among their guests rather than at the head of the table, further emphasizing that this was a gathering of equals. As everyone settled into their chairs, Michael O'Connor looked around the table with obvious emotion. "You know," he said quietly, "in 40 years of working in these gardens, I've eaten plenty of meals alone after long days. I never imagined I'd be sitting at a table like this, surrounded by such good company." "The company makes all the difference," Dr. Williams agreed, accepting the serving spoon from Catherine to help herself to the vegetables. "I spend so many evenings eating quick dinners between patient calls. This feels like a luxury I hadn't even realized I was missing." As the food was passed around the table and everyone began to eat, the conversation flowed with increasing warmth and openness. The formality that typically characterized interactions with the royal family had completely dissolved, replaced by the kind of easy intimacy that develops between friends sharing a home-cooked meal. "This chicken is absolutely perfect," Sarah exclaimed after her first bite. "The seasoning is incredible. Where did you learn to cook like this?" Catherine's face lit up with pleasure at the compliment. "My grandmother taught me the basics, but, honestly, I've been practicing for weeks to get ready for tonight. I wanted everything to be special for all of you." "You practiced for us?" Emma asked, clearly touched by the revelation. "Of course," Catherine replied as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Each of you has brought something special into our lives. I wanted to give you something special in return." The bread, still warm from the oven, prompted its own round of appreciation. James Mitchell, as a professional baker, was particularly impressed. "This is beautiful work," he said, examining the golden crust and perfect crumb. "You can tell it was made with attention and care." "William actually did most of the bread making," Catherine revealed, causing everyone to look at the prince with new appreciation. "It's therapeutic," William explained with a slight blush. "There's something about working with your hands and creating something nourishing that I find incredibly satisfying." As the meal progressed, the conversations became increasingly personal and meaningful. Dr. Williams shared stories about the babies she had delivered and the family she had watched grow over the years. The Mitchells talked about their journey from city professionals to village bakers and the satisfaction they found in providing daily bread for their community. Sarah spoke about the children she taught and her hopes for their futures, while Michael revealed his deep knowledge of local history and his quiet pride in maintaining the beautiful spaces where others found peace and reflection. William and Catherine listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and sharing their own experiences of finding meaning in service and connection to their community. The conversation flowed naturally from topic to topic, with everyone contributing and no one dominating. As they were finishing the main course, Emma Mitchell suddenly paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. "I just realized something," she said with wonder in her voice. "We've been sitting here for over an hour, and I haven't thought once about titles or protocol or how I'm supposed to behave. We've just been talking like neighbors." "Because that's exactly what we are," Catherine said warmly. "We're neighbors who happen to care about each other and about our community." The observation prompted a moment of reflection around the table as everyone considered the extraordinary nature of what was happening. They were experiencing something that seemed almost impossible in the context of modern royal life: genuine human connection across traditional boundaries of class and position. Dr. Williams raised her glass of wine, which William had refilled throughout the meal with careful attention. "I'd like to propose a toast," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "To unexpected friendships and to hosts who understand that the greatest gift we can give each other is our authentic selves." The toast was echoed around the table with heartfelt enthusiasm, but before anyone could drink, Michael O'Connor added his own words. "And to understanding that kindness has nothing to do with position and everything to do with character." As glasses clinked around the table and everyone took a sip of the carefully chosen wine, the atmosphere was charged with a sense of gratitude and connection that none of them would ever forget. But the evening was far from over. Catherine had one more surprise planned, and William was already beginning to clear the plates for the next phase of their extraordinary dinner party. As William and Catherine began clearing the dinner plates with the same personal attention they had shown throughout the evening, their guests instinctively moved to help. Dr. Williams reached for her plate, but Catherine gently stopped her with a warm smile. "Please, just relax and enjoy each other's company. This is our gift to you tonight." The guests watched with continued amazement as their royal host stacked plates and gathered silverware with practiced efficiency. The sight of the future King of England carefully scraping dinner plates and the Princess of Wales collecting wine glasses created a surreal but deeply moving scene. "I feel like I should be documenting this somehow," Sarah Thompson murmured to Emma Mitchell. "No one is going to believe this actually happened." "I'm not sure I believe it myself," Emma replied, watching William balance multiple plates as he headed toward the kitchen. "I keep expecting someone to appear and take over the serving duties." In the kitchen, William and Catherine worked with the smooth coordination they had developed throughout the evening. The dinner service had gone even better than they had hoped, with conversation flowing naturally and barriers dissolving completely. Now came the final course, the one Catherine was most nervous about because it represented the most personal element of the entire meal. "How are you feeling about the dessert?" William asked as Catherine carefully removed the chocolate tart from the refrigerator where it had been setting. The tart was a work of art, with a glossy chocolate ganache top decorated with fresh berries and delicate mint leaves from their garden. Catherine had made it using her grandmother's recipe, one that had been passed down through 3 generations and had never been shared outside the family. "I'm terrified and excited at the same time," Catherine admitted, examining the tart with a critical eye. "This recipe has so much meaning for me. It was the first thing my grandmother taught me to make when I was 8 years old. Every time I make it, I feel connected to her. And now you're sharing that connection with people who have become important to us," Williams said, understanding the significance of the gesture. "It's perfect." Catherine had also prepared fresh whipped cream and coffee, wanting to end the meal with the kind of simple luxury that felt appropriate for the intimate setting they had created. The coffee beans had been selected from a small roastery in the nearest market town, chosen because the owner had told them stories about sourcing beans directly from family farms. As they prepared to serve dessert, Catherine felt a flutter of vulnerability. The tart represented something deeply personal, a family tradition that connected her to memories of learning to cook at her grandmother's side. Sharing it felt like opening another door to intimacy with their guests. "Ready?" William asked, lifting the coffee service while Catherine carefully carried the tart and Emma's beautiful apple cake that would provide a lovely complement to her chocolate creation. When they emerged from the kitchen, the guests were deep in conversation about their shared experiences of community service. Michael was telling the others about his work restoring the old section of the church cemetery, while Dr. Williams shared stories about the mobile clinic she helped organize for rural areas. The arrival of dessert created another moment of appreciative silence. The chocolate tart looked professionally crafted, and the homemade apple cake from Emma created a beautiful contrast. Catherine began slicing the tart with careful precision while William poured coffee and offered cream and sugar. "This looks absolutely stunning," James said, accepting his slice with obvious anticipation. "I can tell just by looking at it that this isn't from any ordinary recipe." Catherine's smile was tinged with emotion as she served each guest personally. "It was my grandmother's recipe. She taught it to my mother, who taught it to me. You're the first people outside our family who have ever tasted it." The weight of that revelation settled over the table as everyone understood they were being offered something precious and irreplaceable. Dr. Williams looked down at her slice with new reverence. "That's an extraordinary honor," she said softly. "Thank you for trusting us with something so meaningful." As everyone took their first bites, the responses were immediate and genuine. The tart was rich without being overwhelming, with a depth of chocolate flavor that spoke to both quality ingredients and careful technique. The texture was perfect, and the subtle additions of orange zest and a hint of sea salt created layers of flavor that evolved with each bite. "This is absolutely incredible," Emma breathed, closing her eyes to savor the taste. "I've been baking professionally for 15 years, and I can tell this represents generations of refinement. The balance is perfect." Michael, who rarely indulged in rich desserts, found himself savoring every bite. "You can taste the love that went into this," he said simply. "It reminds me of my mother's Christmas pudding, not the flavors, but the feeling." The apple cake provided a perfect complement, with its rustic charm and homey spices creating a lovely contrast to the sophisticated chocolate tart. As they enjoyed both desserts with their coffee, the conversation took on an even more intimate quality. Sarah shared memories of her own grandmother's cooking and the ways food had connected her to her family history. Dr. Williams talked about the meals she had shared with patients' families during difficult times, and how food often became a language of comfort when words weren't enough. "There's something about sharing food that breaks down barriers," William observed, refilling coffee cups with careful attention. "It's one of the most basic human connections we have." The evening was beginning to wind down naturally, but none of the guests seemed eager to leave. The candles had burned lower, casting an even warmer glow over the table, and the conversation had reached that comfortable rhythm that happens when people feel completely at ease with each other. Catherine noticed Michael looking thoughtful as he finished his dessert and coffee. "You look like you're processing something profound," she said gently. Michael smiled, his weathered hands folded carefully in his lap. "I was just thinking about all the fancy dinner parties that must happen in grand halls and palaces, with crystal and gold and servants attending to every detail. And here we are, in this lovely cottage, being served by royalty themselves, eating food prepared with love, and feeling more honored and valued than any amount of formal ceremony could ever make us feel." His words captured something essential about the evening that everyone had been feeling but perhaps hadn't quite articulated. The grandeur of traditional royal entertaining paled in comparison to the genuine warmth and personal attention they had experienced. "That's exactly what we hoped you would feel," Catherine said, her eyes bright with unshed tears of gratitude. "We wanted you to know how much you mean to us, not as subjects or constituents, but as people who make our lives and our community richer." Dr. Williams reached across the table to squeeze Catherine's hand. "You've succeeded beyond anything you could have imagined. This has been the most meaningful evening I've experienced in years." As if by mutual agreement, the conversation began to shift toward reflection on the evening and expressions of gratitude. Each guest found ways to articulate what the experience had meant to them, and their words revealed the profound impact of William and Catherine's gesture. "I'll never forget the moment you walked out of that kitchen carrying those first plates," James said. "It was like everything I thought I knew about the world shifted slightly. And I'll never forget how natural it felt after the first few minutes," Emma added. "You made us feel like we belonged here, like we were family." The word family hung in the air with particular resonance. In the span of a few hours, they had indeed become something like family. A group of people connected not by blood or obligation, but by mutual respect, genuine affection, and shared values. As the evening drew toward its natural conclusion, William and Catherine exchanged a look that communicated their shared satisfaction with how perfectly everything had unfolded. They had achieved something rare and precious, an evening that had transformed not just their relationship with their guests, but their guests' understanding of what authentic human connection could look like. The final surprise of the evening was still to come, but first, there would be one more gesture that would ensure this magical evening lived on in everyone's memory forever. As the dessert plates were finished and coffee cups emptied, a comfortable silence settled over the table. It was the kind of peaceful quiet that comes after a perfect meal shared with people who have become dear to each other. The candles had burned down to gentle stubs, their flickering light creating dancing shadows on the walls of the cottage. Catherine looked around the table at the faces of their guests, each glowing with contentment and genuine happiness. This was the moment she had envisioned when she first conceived of the evening. A group of people connected by more than circumstance, bonded by authentic care and mutual respect. Before this evening ends, Catherine said softly, "William, and I have one more small gift we'd like to share with you." She disappeared briefly into the kitchen and returned with a small wooden box that had been her grandmother's. Inside, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, were 5 small packages, each one labeled with a guest's name in Catherine's careful handwriting. "These are just small tokens," William explained as Catherine distributed the packages, "but each one was chosen specifically for you, and each one comes with a story." Dr. Williams unwrapped her gift to find a beautiful antique medical pocket watch, its silver surface engraved with delicate flowers. "This belonged to a country doctor who served this area in the 1890s, Catherine explained. "We found it in a local antique shop, and the moment we saw it, we thought of your dedication to caring for others, often at all hours of the day and night." The doctor's eyes filled with tears as she turned the watch over in her hands, feeling the weight of its history and the thoughtfulness behind the gift. "This is too precious," she whispered. "I can't possibly accept something so valuable." "It belongs with someone who understands its purpose," William said gently. "Someone who carries on the tradition of service it represents." James and Emma opened their package together to find a beautiful wooden breadboard, hand-carved by a local craftsman, with their family name elegantly burned into the wood. Wrapped with it was a small cloth bag of heritage wheat seeds. "The craftsman who made the board has been working with wood for 60 years, Catherine explained. "And the seeds come from a heritage variety that was grown in this region for centuries, but almost disappeared. We thought you might like to try growing your own grain and connecting your bakery to the deepest history of this place." James ran his fingers over the smooth wood, feeling the care and skill that had gone into its creation. "This is incredible," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "To think that we could actually grow grain and complete the entire cycle from seed to bread. It will make your connection to this community even deeper," Emma added, already imagining the possibilities. Sarah unwrapped her gift to find a beautiful leather-bound journal, its pages handmade from recycled paper. "We know how much you care about your students and their futures," William explained. "We thought you might use this to record their stories, their dreams, their achievements. A book that celebrates the young lives you're helping to shape." Sarah opened the journal carefully, inhaling the scent of the fine leather and feeling the texture of the unique paper. "I can already imagine filling this with their voices," she said. "What a beautiful way to honor their journeys." Michael's package contained something that surprised everyone. It was a small, beautifully framed photograph of the church garden in full spring bloom, taken from an angle that showed the ancient stone walls, the carefully tended flower beds, and the peaceful pathway he maintained with such dedication. "We took this photograph early one morning when you were working," Catherine explained. "We were struck by how the light fell across the garden and how perfectly it captured the sanctuary you've created for so many people. But look at the back of the frame." Michael turned the frame over to find an engraved plaque that read, "In appreciation of Michael O'Connor, whose hands create beauty and whose heart creates peace. These gardens bloom because of your devotion." The groundskeeper stared at the plaque for a long moment, overwhelmed by seeing his quiet work recognized and honored in such a meaningful way. "Nobody ever," he began, then stopped, unable to find the words. "Your work matters deeply," William said, his voice filled with sincerity. "The peace that people find in that garden, the sense of connection to something eternal, you create that every day." As the gifts were admired and stories shared about their significance, Catherine realized that the evening had accomplished everything she had hoped for and more. The barriers between royalty and commoners had dissolved completely, replaced by genuine human connection and mutual appreciation. But the most powerful moment of the evening was yet to come. As the guests began to express their thanks and prepare for departure, Dr. Williams stood up and raised her coffee cup. "I'd like to say something," she began, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of speaking truth in difficult moments. "We all came here tonight thinking we were guests at a royal dinner party. What we discovered instead was something much more precious. We found ourselves welcomed into a family." She paused, looking around at each face in turn. "William and Catherine, you've shown us that true nobility has nothing to do with titles or positions. It comes from how we treat each other, how we serve each other, and how we choose to use whatever privileges we have to lift up the people around us." Michael stood up slowly, his weathered hands clasped in front of him. "I've worked on these grounds for decades," he said quietly. "I've seen many important people come and go, but I've never seen anyone more worthy of respect than what you've shown us tonight." Sarah rose next, her teacher's instincts making her think about the lesson being demonstrated. "You've taught us something about leadership that no textbook could ever convey. Real leadership means making others feel valued and important, not making yourself feel important at their expense." James and Emma stood together, their hands intertwined. "You've changed how we think about community and friendship," James said. "This evening will inspire how we treat our customers and how we think about our role in this village." The moment was becoming increasingly emotional, with several people wiping away tears. But these were tears of joy and gratitude, not sadness. They were tears that came from experiencing something unexpected and beautiful. William stood up, his own eyes bright with emotion. "Thank you all for allowing us to serve you tonight. You've given us a gift that's impossible to repay. You've shown us what genuine friendship looks like." Catherine rose as well, looking around at the faces that had become so dear to her over the course of the evening. "This cottage became a real home tonight because you filled it with warmth and laughter and authentic connection. You'll always be part of this place now." As the evening finally drew to a close, each departure was marked by long hugs and promises to stay in touch. These weren't the polite farewells typical of formal events. They were the reluctant goodbyes of people who had found something special together and didn't want it to end. Dr. Williams was the last to leave, lingering to help Catherine blow out the remaining candles. "You know," she said softly, "I've delivered hundreds of babies over the years. I've watched families grow and change and face challenges together. Tonight felt like watching the birth of something new, a different way of thinking about how people can connect across differences." After the last guest had departed, William and Catherine stood together in their kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of their extraordinary evening. The dishes could wait until morning. For now, they simply wanted to savor the memory of what they had accomplished. "Do you think it changed anything?" Catherine asked, leaning against William's shoulder as they looked out the window at the quiet countryside. "I think it changed everything," William replied, wrapping his arms around her. "For them and for us." The story of that evening spread quietly through the village in the days that followed, not as gossip or sensational news, but as something precious to be shared carefully. Each guest found ways to pass on the lesson they had learned about the power of authentic service and genuine connection. Dr. Williams began personally walking patients to their cars after appointments, taking extra moments to check on their well-being. The Mitchells started a weekly community gathering at their bakery, where neighbors could share coffee and conversation. Sarah incorporated lessons about service and kindness more intentionally into her curriculum. Michael began leaving small bouquets from the church garden for visitors who seemed particularly in need of comfort. The ripple effects of that single evening continued to spread, creating a network of kindness and authentic connection that touched countless lives. William and Catherine had discovered that true leadership wasn't about being served, but about serving others in ways that honored their dignity and celebrated their worth. Years later, when historians looked back on the reign of King William V, they would note many significant diplomatic achievements and policy initiatives. But those who were closest to the royal family would remember this evening as the moment when everything changed, when a future king and queen discovered that the greatest power they possessed was the ability to make others feel valued, important, and loved. The cottage remained their retreat, and they continued to host similar evenings throughout their lives, always remembering the lesson they learned that first magical night. That genuine human connection is the most precious gift anyone can offer or receive, regardless of their position in the world. The bonds formed that evening proved to be lasting and deep. Dr. Williams, the Mitchells, Sarah Thompson, and Michael O'Connor became not just friends, but family. They celebrated holidays together, supported each other through difficult times, and continued to inspire each other to serve their community with greater dedication and love. And whenever anyone asked them about the secret to true happiness and fulfillment, they would smile and share the story of an evening when royalty served commoners. And everyone discovered that the greatest nobility comes from the size of one's heart, not the height of one's position.